Okay. I wanted to remind everybody that in addition to introducing yourself, remember that what we're doing here is talking about how we can find out better in K-12 what we can do to support kids' success in post-secondary occupations, whether it's work or schooling. And as we do so, we're kind of shifting our focus a little bit from the previous focus of the Everyone Graduate Center, which is graduating more kids from high school, into graduating more kids from high school ready for college. And what we view is a collaboration among partners are one of the key ways to do all this, recognizing that schools can't do everything on their own. You know, educators are hired to teach and administer, and we're asking people to expand their roles. And so the question is, in part, how can we strengthen the system and strengthen all of our engagement to make that work better? So with that very brief introduction, I'm hoping that the folks on the line can introduce themselves, and I hope you won't be shy. You're just going to have to jump in. When there's a silence, the next person should step forward. But I'm going to call on Mike Barney, since I know he's on the line, to introduce himself, and we'll go forward from there. Name, role, organization, and what you're really interested in learning and sharing.
Thank you, Joanne. I'm Mike Barney, Riverside County Office of Education, Instructional Services. And I am interested in the continued collaboration between everyone. So for these last couple of years, the ideas have been wonderful. So just continue the work. Thank you, Joanne.
Super. Super. Next person.
Hi, my name is Kenneth Mason. I'm a member of the Georgia State Board of Education, and I also work with Southern Regional Education Board based out of Atlanta. I am excited about this work, new to this work, but I am fascinated by the intersection of so many important things around young people in our communities with what this collaboration is studying. And so I'm excited to contribute from both perspectives, and a perspective as a young parent as well.
We're delighted to have you, Ken, and thanks for being a new person and partner. Next person.
This is Penny Jordan from Partners for Education at Berea College. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer. I've participated in some of the prior work, but we're really interested in this particular topic because we do a lot of collective impact work in our communities, and this really connects to that.
And just so the rest of you know, Penny works in Eastern Kentucky, the old coal country for the most part, highly impoverished, which this stuff is. And what Berea College, which is a private college, is doing is they've established partnerships with 18 to 20 counties and districts in their region, different grants, but they've done it masterfully, and they're real interested in rural, which should definitely appeal to Ken Mason, who just spoke. Next person.
Joanna, this is Farron Hollinger.
Hi.
I'm a former Alabama superintendent, a 30-year public educator. Recently, within the last 8 years, I've established the Acrobos Group, which is an educational research strategic consulting firm. Very interested in the collaborative efforts. I love it when organizations and entities with common cause and purpose work together. I believe that's the way to be successful, and I think the project that we're elaborating on today is a major step in that direction, and just pleased to be.
We're really delighted to have you, Sharon.
Hi there.
Hi there.
I'm Rhonda
Atkins,
and
I'm from Valencia College.
We work with the University of Central Florida in order to have a direct connect program to them. And we are working on a downtown campus with them, which is adjacent to a K-8 school. So we're developing sort of a direct connect partnership with them as well. So I'm looking forward to ways that we can maximize that partnership through what I learned from this organization.
And we're interested in learning from you too. What does it take to get that kind of a collaboration off the ground and really functioning? So it's always a two-way street here.
Good afternoon. Well, for most of you, it's afternoon, I assume. This is Kyle Hartung. I'm with JFS. I'm the director of the Pathways to Prosperity initiative here. And I'm really excited to be on the call today, and in particular interested in questions around the variety of ways that we need to define what it means to be post-secondary ready, as well as the alignment between educational systems and the needs and realities of labor markets, such that we can really support all young people on a path toward family-sustaining wages and careers that help them feel a strong sense of identity and sense of accomplishment in their lives.
And for those of you who don't know it, we're first delighted to have Kyle with us as part of the whole JFF team. JFF stands for Jobs for the Future, which is a Boston-based organization, which I know the folks in Georgia who are on the line know well of, because the promises to Pathways to, here I'm getting it wrong, Pathways to Prosperity has been a big effort in Georgia. And the general questions Kyle raises are excellent ones. So let's proceed. And thank you, Kyle, for joining.
Pleasure.
Hi there. This is Carla Gay from Gresham Barlow School District in Portland, Oregon. I'm the Executive Director of Innovation and Partnerships here, which is a new position in the district. And I bring to the district a history of working in early warning systems and college and career readiness, particularly for underserved and at-risk student populations. And I'm excited to be on this work group.
Super. We're delighted to have you.
Hi, folks. This is Mara Shanfield from the American Institutes for Research. I'm excited to be here today. And in particular, really interested, lately I've been thinking a lot about the crossover between social emotional learning and sort of tier 1 interventions under early warning system work and the intersection there and how we can prepare kids best for post-secondary success in that regard.
Great. Thank you for joining.
Hi, everyone.
Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Angela Romans, and until very recently, I was the Senior Vice President for Programming at Say Yes to Education, although I've been involved in the PAS work since I was at the Annenberg Institute for School Reform at Brown. Really happy to be continuing in this work, and I am since I have been working in collective impact space, like several other folks on the call, really interested in what it takes for collaborators and partners to play in the sandbox together. What are the actual structures and strategies and capacities that it takes for folks to come together around some common goals for young people, and not only come together, but stay together in a way that's sustainable for the benefit of the young people?
That's a great question. That's a great segue in a minute when others have finished introducing themselves into one of our key questions for the meeting. Because I think the question is, is collective impact where we start or where we get midway as we try and intensify our efforts? But thanks, Angela, for bringing that up very much. And who's next?
Hi, this is Kate Dopich. I'm with Big Brothers Big Sisters of Eastern Missouri and located in St. Louis. I'm our Chief Program Officer. And really excited. This is my first time on a call, but excited So many things that have been mentioned are certainly on my radar as we work with our youth through the age of 25. So excited to hear more about everyone else's work and talk about how, as a nonprofit, we can partner well with the school district.
Super. And we've done great work in Missouri for a long time.
Thank you.
Anybody else on the call that would like to jump forward?
Yeah, this is Brad Bryant from Georgia, and my current role is with our REACH scholarship program, which is our state's needs-based scholarship program, which is aligned and complements our HOPE merit-based scholarship. Most of the time that I've been around education has been in a governance capacity. I was a member of 100,000 student local at Metro Atlanta School Board and then the state board for 8 years. And I guess observations would be is that collaboration and collective impact are unnatural acts, particularly in the education space. So I think this work group is particularly important in terms of taking the really good work that's gone on with the pathways and the early warning systems and trying to figure out how we marry that and embed that more systemically in the work that we do. And of particular interest to me, we have 180 school systems in Georgia, and I am particularly interested in seeing how we can bring to bear this work in our deeply rooted, generationally impoverished systems that we have in Georgia, and about half of our systems would be low wealth and high poverty systems. So I'm hoping we can take some of the things that work well in an urban, suburban setting and export and scale them to those have-nots that are present in Georgia.
Of which there are many.
Yes.
I lived in Georgia for 30 years, and I'm well aware of what Brad is bringing up. I'm curious whether John Green is on the line, or whether he may have joined us yesterday and not been on the call today. Because this issue of how do you really energize rural communities, smaller communities, low wealth communities that have they don't have big nonprofits hovering around them usually or nearby. So it becomes an essential question of mobilizing a community. It's extremely important. Who else? Or shall we move forward?
Hey everyone, this is Liz Nolan with the Philadelphia Education Fund. We've been a partner for many years since the inception of the work. We're really interested in learning what was mentioned before about what it really means to be, post-secondary ready, and how we can really strengthen the vertical alignment between our K-12 systems and our higher ed institutions.
Super. That Philadelphia Education Fund has just been a long-time partner. They actually partnered with us at JHU beginning in around 2006 for some of the very early work on what were the predictors of sixth graders not making it to college or to graduation, was how we were thinking in those days. And of course, with sixth graders, we still got 6 years to do something about it. So we really thank Beth for joining us again.
We're excited to be here. Thank you.
Great.
And this is Sarah Frizzell from Education Northwest. I'm just on listening to this call, helping more around the data sharing group. But I am interested to hear what everybody has to say on the collaboration piece, and that's all I'm going to say for right now, so we can just move on.
Okay. Others? Do we have Bob? Is Bob Balfant on the front line yet?
Yeah, Bob Balfant is here from the Everyone Graduate Center.
Well, that's good to know. Any others?
Hey, Joanna, it's John Green from West Florida. So I just got connected, so glad to be on the call.
Well, that's super. Brad, if you had missed it, Brad Bryant just gave a super introduction to the way a state might think about collaborating for its low wealth communities. We're delighted to have you with us.
Thank you.
So, we all set to go? I'm not sure, maybe Amanda could introduce from our staff. She's Deputy Director of Digital Communications. Ways for you to communicate and just the total setup.
At the top of the bar, you guys, for those of you who are new to Zoom, this is Amanda Martirana. As Joanna stated, there is a chat function. Feel free to use the chat function, or you have the capability to mute and unmute yourselves from the managed participant list at the very top. So this is a working session, so feel free to jump in either of those ways.
And Amanda, are you going to be monitoring those messages, and you'll jump in when you see some in front of you that seem particularly important?
Sure, no problem.
Hey, that would be super. And I think we also have on the line Charlene Przeski and Ann Mayu. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful. We welcome them, and you all hear from them and all of us from time to time. So that is our team. And we
There's also
them.
Alan online. I don't believe Alan.
Okay, Alan.
But he's also on as well. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Alan is a writer who's joined us, who's very familiar with the South and with education journalism. He's a veteran. So that's our team. We've heard from you and your team. We've had 2 very successful and interesting work group conversations with about the same number of people each time previously in the last few days. And so now we're looking at this area of collaboration. The 2 questions we posed to you in advance had to do with do we want to focus on collective impact, first of all, or are we better perhaps in thinking about smaller units approaching reform? And remember that this is from the perspective that what we will be trying to do in about 14 months, 13 months is teach what we've learned in Pathways to Adult Success to other new districts, schools, states, people, nonprofits. And how do you get started becomes a key question for everybody. That's to me, an extremely interesting question. I really want to zero in on it. The second question we raised is the focus on community colleges. It's only recently that people have started distinguishing very clearly between outcomes from community colleges and outcomes from 4-year education. Community colleges in some states like California enroll about 50% of the college-going population. And in many states across the nation, they have absolutely abysmal completion rates. The reasons are many. The kids and students have many impediments. The colleges aren't necessarily organized for success. They're organized for such multiply different constituencies, if you were. The average age is around, at most community colleges, is in the late 20s. It's not your basic 18-year-old. So there are many questions there, and as we all look at this issue of college readiness, that's something that has emerged as to what should we all be doing in that realm. So I'm putting that on the table as well. And then third, the unstated question, or your question. What do you want us to bring out, which some of you talked about as you introduced yourself? Where do you think we should be focusing when we think about collaborations for student success. So with that, who'd like to jump in first on this question about collective impact? Yes, no, maybe, how?
Joanne, I don't mind jumping in there. If
Okay.
I'll give a little brief introduction. We've been working on essentially a collaboration in West Georgia for the past 3 years in terms of tangible work. There's been a lot of prior relational work to that time through some workforce education efforts and so forth. But essentially about 3 years ago, the university and the technical college, along with the K-12 districts and some other sector representation, decided to work together. And so then they, and this was within one county of what we consider a 5-county, 7-district region, about 70,000 students total. But within this particular context, it was about 20,000 students. And so the collective impact research was really important in terms of the design phase, where we developed a model from a community response. But alongside of that was the relational development that was based on understanding a unifying framework that we put in place, where people from various sectors could actually communicate about, student outcomes. And so I sort of see this as a hand-in-hand type thing. I think the collective impact strategies are very appropriate for designing the support elements that make a collaboration sustainable. But then I also see that if you do just the framework from collective impact without the relational infrastructure, that you're probably not setting it up for sustainability. And in a lot of regards, it's coming to that critical unit of familiarity, which is the community, and rather than the region. And so within our region, we now have a network essentially of community responses, but they all have some common language that helps them learn from each other, and I think that's a key part. And so somewhat this reminded me of leadership and management, where we've watched people describe the difference between those two, and essentially you really can't have one without the other. So we sort of view, leadership as that's a vision for management, and management is the science of leadership. And so you really have to intertwine both. And I think I see that in terms of collaborations for student success and collective impact infrastructure. So that's kind of the short answer.
That's very helpful. Would somebody else like to join in?
Hi, Joanna. This is Angela Romans, and I'm partly wondering if your question is getting at, should we as a working group have a common set of goals and strategies across the 20-something of us, or does it make sense to break down into smaller groups? The way the question was worded is, or should we have dyads or triads? Because I don't think those two are mutually exclusive. I think that part of a lot of collective impact infrastructures around a backbone organization or entity is also having smaller working groups and smaller project groups, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think those two are necessarily mutually exclusive. So I'm wondering if that's more what you're trying to ask, or do we want to embrace all of the framework of collective impact, which certainly I think has lots of strengths as a unifying framework. And I think, as John mentioned, a lot of what gets lost in some of the conversation about collective impact is the relational aspect, is education equity, is sort of grassroots community leadership and impact. So there are lots of critiques about the general framework of collective impact that I think could be embedded in your question too. So I guess I'm just trying to get hone in a little bit more on like what's the focus of the question. Is it more do we all work together, or should we have subgroups, subcommittees, or is it do we want the framework of collective impact versus some other framework for collaboration? Or is it both of those questions? I'm not sure.
Probably both of those, but if we wanted, I'm not a person who likes theory and who's that comfortable with it. If you wanted to frame my question in my absolutely personal words, it would be, how do we make things work at a community level? We're trying to get some better outcomes for our kids. How are we going to do that? Who do we need to bring to the table? How are we going to bring them to the table? Are we going to change our tactics over time? And I think I raised the question about collective impact because I have seen and experienced communities who get involved in bringing literally 50 or 100 entities to the table and end up in frustration. And so as we refer back to our own experiences, thinking about if you are getting something started and you're moving it forward, what is the best way to go? And there may be differences because we, in this group alone, much less the larger PAS group, represent states, districts, counties, schools. We don't represent too many schools yet. Nonprofits and intermediaries, so there are going to be different perspectives. So let's boil it down to how do we get something started? How do we make things work? Maybe that's a simpler way to approach it, first of all.
So I love that. That's really helpful. Thanks.
So Joanna, I'll give you our perspective out in Riverside County. So we are just one of many counties in California. We have about 423,000 students, 23 districts. One is very small, 12 students, and one is very large, 56,000. And so what we've found and we've tried a variety of models, as you can imagine. So we work with all 23 districts through one model and another model. We might only work with a few and so on. But we found that working with a small group of districts that are very motivated and influential within the larger group of our educational community out in Riverside County, that group then can have a domino effect on the others. So we see our job is pulling those groups together. So 5 districts, a community college, our UC, and our Cal State. And we start working on different kind of metrics. Those programs become successful, then we start pushing those programs out to the larger group of districts that we're responsible. And in some cases, one of our programs actually went statewide. So I agree with you. I think sometimes too big of a group is problematic. And also, if you use a small group and it's not influential, I think that becomes problematic too, because you have influence the larger stakeholders within your community.
So if I'm hearing you right, it's get a right-sized group together to start with, big enough to have impact, small enough to be communicating and manageable, and produce some exemplars that make sense to other school districts or people or organizations or universities looking on who are contemplating this work. Is that a summary?
No, so that was actually very good. The only thing I would add is I think one thing is one of the metrics that you should choose has a lot of our metrics out in California are for our groups that are struggling. There's an achievement gap, but there's some metrics that we can help them out, and yet also it has a domino effect with the general population. And so we've chosen, FAFSA is a good example of that metric. Do a FAFSA program for our underserved students. That program will actually have a domino effect to help our students. So I would just add that little nuance. If you can pick a couple of metrics, or at least a metric that affects your general population as much as your neediest population, that helps to help grow the program.
That's very helpful, and it also adds really a third factor, which is keep metrics, keep data, and use it.
This is Carla, and I wanted to just kind of echo what I heard Mike say and Angela, and that is that I think collective impact, like a lot of buzzwords, it really depends on how you implement it. And to me, so I used to be in the largest district in the state, and now I'm in one of the smallest districts, but in the same region. And so we definitely have mutual interest between our larger district and the district I'm in now. However, the approach is really different, because I have to look from the seat that I sit in, who do I need to engage for my role. And I do think that it's finding some other like-minded leaders who sit at a seat to take initiative. And then it's also getting some outside pressure to the table. So my particular perspective is getting a smaller group of people who've got a voice at a variety of tables. And that includes getting parents to the table, or students, as well as your business and industry community, who can really kind of amplify whatever you're trying to do. And then you can do subcommittees, et cetera, but I think the collective impact is great. It's really hard to implement unless you kind of know where you're headed overall. So somehow it's finding that key leadership that says, this is where we're heading, right? And then the collective impact group can start to flesh out that, even put more bones in it. But you kind of have to find those key leaders in the area who are going to be on enough platforms and be consistently leading that conversation. And for us, our key piece here in Oregon is really, how are we improving or creating really strongly articulated pathways to post-secondary, whatever that is, whether that's an industry recognized credential or a 4-year university that culminates in a doctorate degree. So trying to really have those articulated pathways aligned with workforce and K-12 or pre-K is a challenge. So it's like finding somebody from each of those walks and pulling them together. And then things like the data piece of early warning systems fall into place, because people sort of naturally recognize a need to have those predictive analytics in place in order to do the work. But they have to have some bigger understanding of where we're all collectively headed. And I just think that requires a few kind of key people, at least initially. It's really hard to pull, as you've noted, 50 people to the table and do anything that results in a sustainable implementation of the actual work.
Cool.
This is Kyle from JFF. I agree with that. I think that's a really helpful comment, as well as some of the preceding ones. And I think one of the things that I'm hearing, and that this speaks to with me, is what I would term sort of focusing on systems rather than programs, in that getting a system design right can then create the container in which lots of programs serving lots of different needs can live in, rather than creating programs to serve a particular purpose and then trying to cobble them together into a larger strategy. And then the other part of the equation is, and it might be assumed in some of the conversation, but as we're talking about this and bringing people to the table and identifying leaders who have positional authority to actually make systems level change at their respective institutions or with their stakeholder groups, is making sure that post-secondary institutions and partners are at the table for these conversations. If this is about how do we make sure that all young people are really prepared for post-secondary education and training, those providers need to be at the table as part of a co-design to make sure that what we're designing is going to work on their end as well, and that we can be informed by their understandings as well as understand their needs. Likewise, for them to hear the needs and conditions under which people are working and that through which students are coming to their institutions. So I think that whether we're using collective impact or not, making sure that we have all the representative bodies at the table for these conversations and really engaging in a process that allows everyone to learn from and with one another about what will work for all parties involved if we really want to see something changed systematically over time for young people and for communities.
Let me throw out a question. Suppose I'm in a community, I've got lots of interested people. How do I go from nothing to something? Do we need a leader who's going to convene it? How is that going to work?
So Joanna, this is Brad. So what is it you're trying to get? What is it you're trying to get the leaders to do? Because a lot of communities have adopted some form of collective impact or collaboration. I think that I think in terms of what you and Bob have had us working on the past year or two is with specific reference to the pathways is how do we lift up the conversation that has been developed over that period of time and effectively insert it into the conversations that have been going on and within the collaboratives, the collectives that are scattered across the communities that are represented on the phone and those that are not represented on the phone. So I'd agree with Kyle. I think that this is a systems-based approach, that there doesn't need to be a collective impact created. And you're not suggesting this, but for the pathways work, what we need to do as a larger group, and this would include all three work groups, is be as spot on in our articulation of why the pathways is a compelling need for the work that the other educational and the workforce and the economic development collaboratives currently have in place, and put it into that frame. I think at the end of our last session, I think I mentioned to Bob that this reminds me of the Internet of Things, is that this is one of those pieces that helps connect all of that other work, the attendance work, the social emotional learning work together into a frame that allows better predictive analytics for all of our systems. But I'm not sure that the rest of the education community is there yet. And if the education community is not completely bought into this, then I think it's harder to get that external group of stakeholders bought in as well.
And so what I think I'm hearing you say, Brad, as well as other people, is that we need to perhaps coming down on the middle ground, which is take a systematic approach. Because we have in the past really developed a framework for how we want to act. But now we've moved a little bit more towards implementation. How do we make these things happen? And I think what I'm hearing from most of you is this systematic approach that will perhaps, thinking back to what Carla said, vary when you're in a rural area or a small district compared to a large district. But we don't necessarily need, in the beginning, to go to the whole collective impact. And there, I have to say, my point of reference is a place like Cincinnati, where more than 300 groups got involved in sharing what they wanted for their community. And something that large seems to me very difficult to achieve early on. Yet a systems approach brings all, as Kyle said, all the programs together and gives an umbrella for that. And I'm curious if that is what you all think. As you reflect on your own successes and occasional failures, which I'm sure you all have had, like I've had in my life, we all try things we think are great, and they don't always work, you know. So we're coming out that a systems approach is one of the absolute keys to building this all. And then within that, the relationships, which John mentioned, bringing all the people to the table, and especially the consumers or users, if you will, which are higher ed and business people. Is that a fair summary so far?
Well, Joanna, using your Cincinnati model, what I would say is that Cincinnati already has, through the Strive network, they already have all of those stakeholders at the table. So to me,
Yep,
the work.
It was Strive that promoted the idea of collective impact.
Right.
And
yeah.
They didn't 300 people.
Right.
That's the beginning.
So what I was thinking was you take that group of stakeholders and the work that's been generated to date with the pathways is make that compelling argument that for all of those stakeholders to be more successful in the work and the outcomes that they have, this is a critical component to that work, as opposed to, and you're not suggesting this, a standalone effort where the pathways is the silver bullet that will take everybody where they need to be. That'd be the way I would look at it here in Georgia with some of the collective impact efforts we already have underway.
And this is Angela, and I agree with everything that's been said so far. Carla's points, Brad's points, I think Kyle's points, and the summary that you just gave, Joanna. I think the only thing I would add, and especially to Brad's latest point, which is that the PAS is really a framework for existing work and aligning and strengthening and deepening existing work which already exists, as opposed to is something different. The only thing I would add to that is if there's not already a collective impact or collaborative table, or if there are multiple collaborative tables in a community already, one really important thing to think about is alignment. I just had a conversation about Providence, Rhode Island, which is where I live, and have been involved in the collective impact work here. Just had a conversation with someone from the city who was talking about sustaining another project that the city is just engaging in. And I said, well, so there are multiple, sort of collaborative efforts in Providence that have happened over years. The mayor's office launches them, and then 4 years later, they're not necessarily sustained. So what would be different this time that would be different next time? So I think alignment is just really important. Alignment and sustainability.
And I think you're getting at something that Kyle mentioned, which is not getting diverted by individual projects. Am I correct on that? And I'd love to hear from, say, Penny from Berea, because they've got, 18, 20 districts involved in their work. I think you have a lot to share here, as does everybody else on the call.
So Joanna, we actually have 31 counties that we're working in and 37 school districts. And so we are not able to, I think just for a lot of the reasons that people described, to pursue collective impact around the entire community, which is, why we're interested in this. But we go deep in a couple of counties, and because we also have some Promise Neighborhood grants. So we do a lot of convening in Perry County and Knox County, Kentucky, for example. And so we had at our Perry County launch, we had over 140 people from health and the public school system, the community college that was there, the community action agencies. There were just leadership. We had government officials there to talk about cradle to career, what we would want to see happen in that community. And what we did from that is the community came up with 6 results ranging from all children are healthy to all students enter kindergarten ready to learn. And those groups broke off into 6 different working groups. And so right now those working groups usually have participants of maybe 15 to 20 people every time they meet, like monthly. And then those groups are collaborating within the community to think about, so if their result is all young people graduate from high school, what do the people in that room contribute to that result? And then how can they collaborate and align contributions instead of working in different silos? But definitely we're also in the learning process. That community is now a Strive Together community as well. And so we're working with Strive on how they've seen a lot of success in the Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky area, and then how we bring that to Eastern Kentucky. But we've seen, because we work with K through 12 grant programs, that it's not just the academic rigor that we have to focus on. There's a lot of things that are impacting a child's ability to learn. And it's important for us to be connecting with the healthcare organizations and the housing service organizations and the community action agency within that community, because all of those factors influence whether we can meet our result of having a young person ready to graduate from high school.
Mm-hmm.
Does that help, or what questions can I answer about how we're trying to do it?
Okay, one of the things I'm curious about is, were your relationships with Perry County new, or had you for previous years embarked on them? Because some of what I'm thinking is that there is a stream of existing relationships that are not woven together yet or braided together, that are what one capitalizes on, with some trust in those relationships that then enable a collective impact approach.
Right, that's exactly true. We had actually been working in Perry County for about 6 years through a Gear Up program and through an AmeriCorps program. And so when we received a Promise Neighborhood grant also to serve that area, we wanted to ensure even internally that we were aligned, because Promise Neighborhood covers a broader group of students than the other 2 projects covered. So, since we had multiple programs operating in that county, we had already developed relationships, particularly with the school district, but not necessarily with the community organizations. So that convening was really to bring together other stakeholders and those working groups to develop across the whole pipeline of youth that we were serving. So our AmeriCorps program serves only high school students. Our Gear Up program starts in middle school, but Promise Neighborhood is 0 to 24.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How about John from Riverside? You've had experience also. Now you don't have as many counties or districts as Berea does, but you've been through the process of essentially developing them, and you as an intermediary organization. And so what were the first steps you took to get where you, say, think back last 3-4 years?
Joanne, I'm guessing you mean me, correct?
I mean, Mike, I know you 2 have been talking, so I might have.
No, that's okay. That's okay. There's a lot on the call. So the history at Riverside County, we were fortunate. I've been very fortunate. My last 3 superintendents are just wonderful, and my current continues that banter. Second one, Ken Young started to create the vision that we need to get kids college and career ready and make that our priority. So all our work started to focus on data, collecting data and those metrics. And then my work within my group was more curriculum focused. So it's all curriculum, making sure that we were preparing our teachers and hence our students and supporting that work. And then, so that was really the kind of that, and that was all 23 districts involved, and it's basically, we're trying to influence them because they're all independent districts, trying to influence them. And then it came around that we had an opportunity to bring a small group of our district together to focus on very small set of metrics, FAFSA, AP participation and pass rate. And then in California, we have what we call A through G courses, and there are college-bearing courses. So it has increased the number of rates in those three areas. And I do want to keep in mind, Riverside County has one of the worst college going rates for a large county. So that was probably another motivation. Even though we're surrounded, we have a UC Riverside in Riverside, we have a Cal State nearby in San Francisco, and we have a bunch of privates within this city and the county of Riverside. So I think the initial always has to be whoever the leader is has to get the focus for the group, to sum it up. And then the second part would be once everyone's on board and your organization is shifting towards that goal or that vision, then the next step is finding a small group of districts, colleges that want to partner so that you can focus on a few of the metrics to make sure that you're getting kids college and career ready.
Do others agree?
Yeah, I think you know, in the West Georgia area, I think there were some key components of that early, you know, starting point. And one main one was really a shift from various correlation variables that gave reasons for students not to be successful to what were some key performance variables that we could all commit to. And, you know, and it kind of struck me when you made your question earlier in terms of the nothing to something. So when I think back to, you know, when there's not a level of commitment, I think that can produce results, that sort of start data points can maybe cause, you know, a definite catalyst. I know in the state, and I think Brad could probably confirm this, when it became widely known that only a third of our third graders were reading on grade level at the end of third grade in the state, that got everybody's attention. And most recently, you know, the data point that's getting a lot of attention in our region is that 17 to 19% of our high school graduates could meet the fitness exam for the military. So that becomes potentially in both of those contexts a national security issue. So suddenly you get people who may not have been engaged in developing the youth in their community become very interested in trying to help. And so when that happens, though, you've got to be able to channel that energy, I think, in an effective way. And so we were fortunate to develop some modeling, I think, that took place pretty early, and it's helped us gain some traction. So, but I do think fewer measures along that continuum from birth to career really do begin to make a difference in terms of, you know, sharing ideas and improving and so forth. And so I do think that's a key part. So I would agree with Mike that.
Joanna, this is Alan Richard. I just wanted to point out that on the chat, in case you don't see it, Kenneth Mason in Georgia has asked a couple of questions. I'd be happy.
Alan, if you'll go ahead and read those, I was going to jump in there and do that.
Okay,
So
sure,
if you'll go ahead and take care of that, thank you.
So Kenneth, I'm speaking for you. But you asked in the chat window, how best can we support more quality learning experiences in low wealth, lower achieving school districts? Those are students most likely to attend and struggle in community colleges. These students are part of a larger group of learners who don't graduate for a myriad of reasons, as Joanna said at the beginning of the call. How do we learn from their perspectives and involve them in creating solutions? And then finally, what ensures those students receive the appropriate knowledge and skills they need to be successful incrementally in a chosen career? How do leaders in education, public health, housing, and economic development collaborate to establish a foundation for success for this generation of young people?
Thank you. I have just become disconnected, so I hope you'll, in some respect. So if you all will carry on while I restore connections here. I thank Ken for bringing those questions up and for making the connection between learning experiences and community college. And before we go on to that, and this is a great time to do it, I did want to summarize and just make sure I'd heard everything that, or the key points that everybody noticed. First of all, we begin with data. We move away, as John pointed out, from correlational variables. The students are poor, they're of color, they're this, they're that, to indicators we can do something about that are productive and that are performance variables. Those are things that adults can affect. And that's what, for those of you who were involved last year, we'll remind you that one of the key factors about indicators is that they're malleable. We can do something about them. So this is, I think, a very important point. A second point that was brought up is that we make sure that some of the data we're using for publicity really grabs people's attention. If only a third of the kids in your community can read well at third grade, that does speak to everybody. So does the fact that only 20% of the community is thin enough, if we will, to meet military standards. These are, the kind of data translated that everybody understands. We use that to create a framework and a system. And in between that, there's a leader who's got to step forward and say, folks, this is what we've got to do. So we've got two ingredients here: data, that with a couple of qualifications, a leader who's going to organize things. We've then got trusting relationships that have been built over a number of years, not between everybody, but between a few key entities. And then we go from that into a collective impact situation, or a moderately collective impact situation, maybe a system impact situation. And if you're an organization like Berea that engages 31 counties, 37 districts, you may have to choose your focus. And I think this is also true in Riverside County and to some extent in West Georgia. You've chosen who to work with in order to achieve the best outcomes and examples that can be then shared with everybody else. So what we're looking at is a progression and continuum of development. Is that fair enough to say?
This is Rhonda Atkinson at Valencia College. And a couple of things you mentioned that I thought were relevant to what has occurred here in Central Florida was the idea of having a few people and having the trust relationships built. So, for example, one of the things that developed here in Central Florida in 2005 is the University of Central Florida created an agreement with 4 of the local community colleges. And they created something that was called Direct Connect, such that if a student got an associate's degree at one of the partner community colleges, they were guaranteed admittance to the University of Central Florida. And so, so what that has meant is, for example, they've had, since the beginning, they've had 62,000 transfer students and over 46,000 bachelor's degrees have been granted to that group. And what they've also found is they've had a higher percentage of minority student success in the college. For example, more than half of the bachelor's graduates that started at our college, Valencia, in 2016, 2017 were underrepresented minorities. And so then that added to the diversity of the university's student body. Now, in addition to that, Valencia created partnerships with some of the, with the school district. And so there are schools, there's one school locally where you can complete your associate's degree and your high school graduation simultaneously, and then be prepared for a job in the defense industry, in like Lockheed Martin. And so, but I think that that part of that came from the two college presidents that first envisioned that, and then as you mentioned, through the trust that people had that no one entity was going to like take over the show and somehow slight one of the other groups, and that's worked out really well here. But I think it's a fairly unique partnership because I think a lot of people don't necessarily have that trust built up.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we just echoed. Thank you. The importance of trust. You've also brought up something that I think refers in some way to what Ken Mason just brought up, which is the importance of clarifying ways to navigate to college.
Correct.
And to success.
Yes, and they made that very clear here.
That is excellent. And it's also, this is taking that navigation beyond the hands of an individual counselor, counseling a student, into an overall system approach that says,
right. And one of the other things that they did is UCF offers several of its degrees on our campuses. So you could go over to the main UCF campus, or for some degrees, business is one, elementary education is one. You could get your degree here. And then one of the other new partnerships one of our campuses has is with the public schools, in that they're bringing in elementary ed majors, and the students go to school 2 days a week, and the other 3 days a week they work at the school as aides or substitute teachers or paraprofessionals or whatever. And so what they're doing is creating that pipeline back to the school in turn, and the school will pay for, the school district will pay for part of their tuition and costs, you know, for them to go back to the school and teach.
Wow. I need to connect you with folks in Memphis who aren't on the call.
Right.
They have similar interesting programs. So we've just broken Ken's question down into two parts, I think. Maybe you all are seeing something differently or hearing something differently. One is the system steps we can take to transform essentially an imperfect system of alignment, K-12 into higher ed and the future. And then the other question is, what do we do individually? Am I right? Am I hearing things right?
Could you say more about the what do we do individually part?
Well, the what do we do individually is, at least in my thinking, you know, counselors sitting down with students, reviewing their transcripts, saying, you're missing math, you're missing this, you're missing that. You need to take this, you need to take that.
I see. Yeah.
Then there's an intermediate level, I guess, which is also could be considered to be part of college navigation, which is exposed to college or post-secondary items, not only in 12th grade, but beginning way back.
Yeah.
From frame, it would start at 5th grade or so. So that students understand what is college and what is career. So maybe that's actually 3 phases. What do other people think?
This is Kyle from JFF. I think that sounds right. And these synthesis points are making me think of something we see a lot in the field and try to really help to support and advocate for is, as you're describing, this sort of a really clear and systemic approach to early and frequent career advising. You know, so how do we introduce young people to the variety of careers that are available to them in different types of industries, but also with a particular focus on their real regional labor markets? You know, we know that most kids don't go very far from home, if at all, and even if they do go away, often they come home. And so really leveraging this work and thinking in the conversations in the regional labor market and the needs of that labor market. And so how do we, you know, how often do we put, you know, labor market information and helping young people understand different career trajectories and the impact of potential credentials on their career prospects over time? And so how do we incorporate that into this as one of these sort of primary or intermediary steps? But then the other part of what you were talking about that really resonates with me is what I see as the connective tissue in many ways between the education side and the industry and workforce side. And I hear this a little bit in the way that you've got, you know, students coming back into the school district, for instance, to do teaching is, you know, what's the systemic approach to work-based learning that's iterative and of increasing complexity over time, you know, reaching way back into career awareness and exploration, connected with that college advising in middle school or even beforehand, and then building opportunities for young people to connect with professionals in the workforce in different careers and in different industry sectors in increasingly complex opportunities, you know, maybe ultimately culminating in paid internships or co-op experiences or apprenticeships as they, you know, merge out of secondary school and cross over into some kind of post-secondary education or training. And so I think that the marriage of career and information advising as well as work-based learning is one of the critical ways that we can start to bring these, you know, different stakeholder groups together to talk about how do we make sure that young people have viable options that they've had an opportunity to wrestle with and experience and develop a sense of identity in relation to who they want to be in the world of work, and you know, be encouraged that they can find meaning in work, and that that's a viable thing that most adults, or we strive to maybe have be true for most adults, that in part we derive part of our identity from the type of work we do, and that we have agency in deciding what that work may be able to be.
Mm-hmm. Those are very interesting points. I'm curious, Ken, to put you on the spot, since you generated this conversation to some extent, what your thoughts are from a different perspective in Georgia.
Well, I mean, just in reaction to, you know, the previous comments, I believe that not only the local workforce development leaders should be a part of it, but you know, those leaders change, and those leaders change or they don't change, especially in rural areas. You know, you never know what industries are moving in, or at least the students don't know it, and the counselors don't know what skills that students need, not just their knowledge, their content knowledge that is represented on the standards, but what's in Western Georgia, what's in Coffee County, Georgia, you know, what's within 50 miles that I can start thinking about in sixth grade, skill-wise, and developing those technical skills. And so and then that student, that young person that we're actually trying to help, I think they have something, knowing more about the variety of ways in which they struggle. I believe that that's going to lead us to multiple solutions. And I don't know if that is the strategy of a collective impact, but I think if we start thinking regionally, we start thinking locally, we need to start thinking of the students that we know that desire this next step, and the parents that are working towards it as well. But they don't have the missing pieces, and maybe we're the missing piece that helps them redirect that future. So that's just what I'm thinking now. I just wanted to put out those ideas.
This is Carla in Portland, and I really appreciate what you were saying, Kenneth. And actually, I'm sitting here with the director of our CTE programming in our district, and she's been a regional coordinator for CTE. And one of the key drivers is, what are your regional workforce demands that are high wage and high growth? And then how do you engage those business partners? And I think that, back to Joanna, your question around collective impact, is that if you backwards map where those industry demands are, and getting long-term predictions, so that's where predictive analytics can be helpful, that like, what are we thinking we're going to be needing in 10 years, in 5 years, in 2 years, and then you backwards map that. So if you're thinking in 2 years, those are your current seniors and juniors in high school. How are we plugging them in? And then you backwards map even further, 5 years, those are your middle school kids. What sort of exposure do they need to be having that could prepare them for the changing economic demands out there, and that give them multiple on-ramps into career exploration? And that's particularly for our highly mobile students, and for our students whose families have been left out of the economic opportunities. And then multiple exit ramps that allow them to go directly into the workforce, or to end with an industry credential, or to continue on into post-secondary. And so, yes, we need our post-secondary partners at the table, but they've got to be co-linked with our industry and workforce development partners, particularly as technology is changing so rapidly, and all the predictions around service sector jobs basically coming to a cliff in a few years because everything is automated. We've really got to be thinking about what are the changes in our overall workforce demand. And then you backwards map it even further, which is harder to predict, of course, but down to 10 years. So I would argue that it's creating roadmaps or stackable career ladders that begin in preschool, and that you're actually engaging families, particularly families who've been left out of the workforce or economic opportunities, so that their young children are having exposure as well as adult modeling. And we start to change that whole like first generation notion, because we're changing the trajectory for those families when their kids are young, rather than waiting for their kids to be entering into the workforce. So I think that it's a whole system perspective, and where you start, to me, is your end game, which is what I love about the Pathways to Adult Success, because what we're really talking about is folks who can live in society and contribute to society in productive ways. So I just feel like that backwards mapping, those are the people you got to get at the table, at least initially, to figure out where you're headed. Then you can do your smaller work groups and your smaller programming. And I sent Kyle a separate message, because I really like, that's your bigger strategy. Then you figure out how your programs fit within that, versus creating a bunch of programs and trying to cobble them together. It's like we need a North Star. And there's lots of models on how regional entities can create that North Star and focus on that. But that's the power of collective impact, is figuring out that North Star. The work and the weeds and the details on the ground then comes after that. But it's really hard to do collective impact unless you all kind of know where you're headed regionally.
That's a very good point.
One more thing that I would add is that like in Oregon, we have our economic Department of Economic Development or Workforce Development. Most counties in our state have some sort of county version of that, most regions. And because most regions in the country have some sort of workforce investment board, it seems like that's a really good place where you partner basically your Department of Labor funds with your Department of Ed funds, or the entities that are interfacing with those two.
Mm-hmm. Very good point. I know that's become available for many people now, and aligning those are. I did notice that there are a couple people we've not heard from. I hope they're not shy. Maya from AIR, Kate from Big Brothers Big Sisters, Liz from PEF, if you're still with us. We'd love to hear your voices. What are your thoughts? They may no longer be here. We have had a very interesting conversation so far, and I believe you've all, just in the last few minutes, introduced parents and students who are two constituencies we should not forget, to put it mildly. I really appreciate those who were brought in. Moving forward, what we'd like to do is we'll get all this together in a synthesis of this for you, as well as synthesis of the other work group conversations, one of which happened yesterday and one of which happened last week. And then, we're moving towards in-person meetings in November, and we're really looking forward to having you with us in November, and actually the second one, this group, I believe, is the first week of December. But we'll really dig into these ideas, and we'll have tried to synthesize them for you and want you to tell us yes, no, or maybe. And here's an idea we all forgot. Here's one we don't think stands up anymore. So we'll get your critical input on that. We are thinking and getting started, and I've talked with a number of you about piloting some of these ideas, and we'll be having 2 work groups or webinars, discussion, not really webinars, more like discussions, somewhat like this, October 2nd and 10th, and you should be getting a letter of invitation to those shortly, like next 24 hours. What we'd like to do in the pilot is for you folks to bite off a little piece of your work that interests you very much. Don't want to create extra work for you, but in that work, be identifying the actual time it takes to get from A to B. Because remember, we're trying to teach this in a year. And so we'd love real concrete examples of how you get from A to B, who you needed to involve, who you needed to invite off the boat, who you needed to invite on the boat as your work progressed. What were some of the key decisions that had to be made? Let's see, what else? Those are the main things. What are the key ideas? How did you go forward from there? And this all relates back to a theme, I think, that is related to being embedded in our conversation today, which is the timeline of progress. And how do we get there? So I'm just dropping that on the table. I also need to be thinking about that when we have that meeting next year, we're starting to look at building a network of networks. Who will teach these ideas more broadly? And we'll bring more to you about that as time goes on this year. But wanted to remind you that is a key feature of our work that we propose to date. Before we leave, certainly I want to ask Bob Balfan his comments. He's been very quiet and hope he can join in.
Hi, Joanna. Yeah, no, I think it's been a very, as usual, very enriched conversation, and I'm trying to process almost two strands of thought that I heard that figure out how do you bring them together. I was hearing, I think, a little bit from Brad that, you know, locally, if you don't have the school system on board, it's sometimes hard to organize people around the school system to bring them in. And then at the end of the conversation, though, what I heard is that sort of workforce readiness or workforce forecasting is sort of a North Star driving thing to galvanize communities. And then that got me thinking that, you know, there's a certain distance between school districts and workforce. And if that's the bridge we need to gap, we need to think about how you sort of bridge that gap. And then my final thought was that then I do remember being down in Mississippi recently, and there was a big effort there that they all wanted to be workforce ready communities. So there is some movement in that direction, but I don't think it's everywhere. So I just thought that was an interesting way to synthesize some of what we heard, is that the school district has to be an active player, but workforce is galvanizing, and there's often a distance between schools and workforce that we got to think about bridging, which is the goal of the collaborations, I get, but it is, I thought, an interesting way to frame it.
Well, how would you advance that thought, Bob?
I'm just synthesizing the puzzle. I do not have, that's why I'm saying we need to put good thought on it. There is no simple answer.
How about others in the group? What are your thoughts on hearing this?
Hey, Joanna, this is Liz from the Philadelphia Education Fund. Bob, I think that was really helpful to sort of synthesize what we've been talking about today, and it makes me think too about, you know, what we were talking about in the working group yesterday call, and the one before that too, when we're talking about how counselors work to advise students and how we can use those data pieces from our higher ed institutions, as well as what Kyla was saying about the predictive analytics from our workforce to really better advise students, and also to take into consideration some of the things that you know, we were talking about with how we use the measures that we have with our students, and really set them onto a path to success, but how we can really begin that process earlier if we do engage our industry partners as well.
So thank you for that. I was going to ask if there's common language from the other working groups, common language or common understandings that we should pull from the other working groups to be able to shape how we approach this particular challenge. And maybe, Joanna, you could maybe give us a summary of how you react to that.
I think that's what we're aiming for, is to synthesize everything and bring it together.
Hey, and Kenneth, this is Brad. You know, one of the things, and I love this conversation, but I think that, and Joanna and Bob, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think that one of the reasons to carve out this collaborative effort is not to sell this amongst ourselves, or not to sell the other two working groups, but I kind of envision this group as being the outside salesman for this work, and that the product, we've had input on the product in previous iterations, and now what we're trying to think about is how we go to scale with this and how we convince others that are in our spider web network to become second adopters, if you will, into this work. And I love the fact that Big Brothers and Big Sisters is on the call, because Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Boys and Girls Clubs, all of those folks that are talking about this and trying to congeal these ideas, that's to me what the draw of this collaborative effort is. And if it's to get into the technical piece of what's missing, or to help build what the last pieces of that of the pathway framework, then that may be it may be better to be on a different working group than this one. But to me, for me, the ship is kind of already heading out of the harbor, and it's to start socializing this with all of the others that we come in contact with on a daily basis, whether it's workforce, whether it's economic development, whether it's higher ed, whether it's early ed, whether it's K-12 at the district level or at the state level, to start talking about that compelling need that this draws and aligns a lot of the efforts that are already going on in a disjointed fashion around the country and within communities that are on top of this as well. So I just don't want us to miss that because every part of this is interesting, but it's the collaborative piece that's going to get us to scale, I would argue.
A wonderful point, Brad.
Brad, I want to piggyback on what you just said because we're living it in real time. And it's that really the sense that scalability is a community choice. And so once you've developed a community-based model and truly does, assist in supporting kids' efforts and their pathways to adult success, and then if there are components of that resonate with other communities, you get to realize that pretty quick. And if there's some flaws, you get to see those too. So I think those are some junction points that may go back to what Bob was talking about in terms of making that connection of school districts into the workforce development and education and so forth, because that may be a gap point. And it may be that scalability question on whether or not the community truly selects to scale it, if that makes sense.
Okay, well, we've added salesmanship and marketing to our efforts right now and scalability. And I think as we think about moving into a network of networks, those are absolutely wonderful pieces. For the most part, we think we addressed most of the technical questions last year in the framework or guidelines. We never know which we're calling them. And if there are any people who don't have that, and it's still very much a draft, and I'll tell you the collaboration piece is one of the things that needs fleshing out right away, which I guess yours truly will do, based on your wonderful input. But if you would like a copy of the framework and guidelines and have misplaced it in your zillions of emails, email us, Charlene and Amanda, Ann, and myself, and we'll make sure you get one, just for reference, because y'all have really expressed how wonderfully you believe in pathways to adult success. Can't say any more than that. And we thank you very much for your participation. And Bob, and your help and support and effort and work. And Bob, if you'd like to say 30 seconds, we won't extend our time.
No, I'll leave you that last word.
Rarely. For one, with that, I just want to say thank you so much again, everybody. We will try and get you the synthesis of what everybody's thinking is pretty soon. And we want you to keep on thinking about this and how you're going to deepen your work in your own community. So with that,
right.
Thank you very much.
Y'all have a good one.
Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Appreciate the meeting.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.